and welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. So would that change the position now? That probably takes us nicely on to pick three. The two edge rushers, I'm not convinced, and I suppose there's a balance, right? Because you either pick for one of three things. You pick for potential upside that's going to become something. You pick positional value. Or you pick on need. And I think the need's dangerous. Positional value, considering the tier of quarterbacks, the Nick Bosa's, the Joey Bosa's, the Myles Garrett, everyone's in agreement. There's a consensus that these two guys aren't in that tier. So do you pick somebody who has got the potential to kick the doors in 2 years' time? And watching Trayvon Walker's workout, it's hard not to like. And if you watch him in Georgia, he's at that tightly sort of five technique that doesn't necessarily get enough space to bend the edge, because you know that Georgia defense front seven was the personification of discipline. You know, between all the positions, you couldn't leave your rush lane. You had to be disciplined because they knew the sum of the parts would always win out if they did that, and there was nobody freelancing. So the production isn't there, and on the face of it, now I saw a mock draft today. From Shane Hallam that we've had on a couple of times, talk draft with us, that they had Trayvon Walker at 3. Daniel Jeremiah couldn't stop talking highly of him on that, and I think he's probably one of those guys that teams are higher with than perhaps your general media view. So yeah, over the weekend I kind of opened because I'm a Kyle Hamilton guy, and I think that's because he's the best football player in this draft, and it doesn't matter what position. I think we just need to stack talent for 2 to 3 years, and hopefully we'll be in a position to win. But yeah, for the first time I thought Walker might be the pick there.
Well, my preference at 3 is Aiden Hutchinson. Should he be there, which he won't. No. He's going 1 or 2. If by the grace of the football gods, Aiden Hutchinson ends up at 3, run to the podium. Yeah, do it, get it in, make that guy. I've nicknamed him Wolverine Watt. That's basically what big athletic white guy from the Big Ten, Wolverine Watt. Okay, said he even patterns his game after TJ Watt. He ain't gonna be there. After that, it's Thibodeau. I understand the concerns of Kayvon Thibodeau. I understand that he's a personality that may rub some people the wrong way. I'm fine with that if the guy nails it on the field. Jadeveon Clowney and some of the things we heard about Jadeveon Clowney, it was tough to hear about those things. The lack of practice, late to practice, taking naps in the facility all the time. That's tough when the guy's not getting it done on the field.
Yeah.
Kayvon Thibodeau. Think about the things people have talked about. Oh, well, he was hurt this year, and he took plays off, and it really wasn't that impressive of a year. And he still had the highest pressure rate in the nation. In the middle of an injured year and takes plays off, and he still had the highest pressure rate. Pressure rate is one of the biggest things that is indicative of future success. So for me, it's Hutchinson, it's Thibodeau, and then it's trade back. And the moment you trade back, you talked about it. You go with that Georgia guy, and you just lock it in. I don't believe Thibodeau would be where you are if you're trading back, like say Carolina comes up to 3 or Denver comes up to 3. I don't think Thibodeau's still there once the time you get back on the clock. So at that point, I'm fine with edge rusher. I don't want tackle and I don't want safety. I want edge rusher. I want a guy that's going to put pressure on the quarterback.
Yeah, I suppose if you go with the edge, I suppose one thing actually, I heard this and I thought this summed up really well, was that Aiden Hutchinson will reach his potential, but nobody knows what that is. Whereas the bigger, spectrum of outcomes is with Kayvon Thibodeau, because ultimately he's bigger athlete, better athlete, if he can piece it together. And I listened to an interview of him this week, and I struggled to kind of get my head around what the issue is and why people are concerned. I get it from some angles, but I think I think there's He talked about just the way he talked about, how he, and I know it's kind of cliched, but he's talking about the chess moves and all this kind of stuff and about how he goes about it. So, very methodical guy. He may put it in a different way, a very less polished, less media friendly guy than Aiden Hutchinson, but I think there is a bit of that overthink going on there because the flashes are there, and as you said, the continual pressure rates there, and he's been had injuries. It's probably not the best comparison to say Jadeveon Clowney 2.0, but I always think if they weren't cheaping out on the turf at that point and it had it in turf trays and he doesn't get his knee caught up and a meniscus injury is probably, on top 3 or 4 for particularly an edge rusher to come back from, his career path could have been very, very different because he never quite had that elite burst, after coming back from that. He still, won, but he didn't develop his game. But I think because he got to the NFL without trying, because he was just such a natural athlete, didn't necessarily build on. But yeah, Trayvon Walker was one that I kind of thought of. But look, if it's Thibodeau, after all said and done, I think that's a huge step forward, in terms of getting talent on this roster.
I loved the quote about Clowney because out of context, where he says I'm Clowney 2.0, you don't love it. You don't like the thought process. But the whole quote where he talks about, Clowney underperformed as a pass rusher. Like, I'm going to be better as a pass rusher. I'm going to steal pass rush moves. I'm going to be a big time pass rusher. Whereas he was a really good defender. I'm going to be a big pass rusher. And that's where he kind of felt like he would, 2.0 is supposed to be the improved version.
Yeah.
That's where he kind of felt like he was the improved version of Jadeveon Clowney from that standpoint. I guess the way I would say it is if you ran their careers 1,000 times, the amount of times that Aiden Hutchinson would spend time as the best pass rusher in football is less than the opportunity for Kayvon Thibodeau to spend time as the best pass rusher in football. Both of them are very tiny potential outcomes, but Hutchinson's is smaller than Thibodeau's. Like, there's at least a thought that, like, on a more consistent basis, if you ran through their careers, there's a chance for Thibodeau to end up as the best or one of the best pass rushers in all of football. Whereas Hutchinson feels like high floor and maybe the ceiling's a little bit lower. Yeah. Like, if I told you Hutchinson had Chris Long's career, like, you'd be like, okay, that's not great, but that's a really nice football career, where Long became a sought-after veteran late in his career after a measure of success with the Rams. Like, if I told you Hutchinson had his career, like, that's nice. You don't want to spend the number 3 overall pick on that. Just like you wouldn't want to spend the number 3 overall pick on another Jadeveon Clowney. Like, you'd hope for just a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think there's an element of me. I mean, this is my first year putting a draft board together. I actually caught COVID, so I started just going through tape of edge rushers predominantly, and guys putting kind of 2-minute clips together in terms of watching 5 or 6 games. I think my habit is that I actually want to watch too many games, and then you're not going to get through them. But the ones that I did in the bye week was Thibodeau and Hutchinson, and I think for me it seems like you're going to get a better athlete out of Hutchinson, and therefore the height, weight, speed's been around for a long time. So I think as you said, that the upside is there. In terms of
just a little thing that just popped up. You tell me you're not a little bit surprised by this? The Browns franchise tag David Njoku.
I saw that. Yeah.
That is wild.
Yeah.
The guys wanted out of Cleveland for 2 years. I wanted the Texans to sign that guy in free agency.
Yeah.
How's he getting franchise tagged?
I think it's
what are we doing?
I think that's a tag and trade scenario, I'm assuming. Because
I guess so.
Like what they did with Frank Clark a couple of years ago, waited up to the draft and got somebody. Because I don't think this tight end class is all that great. I think it's a toss up between who your number one is. It's pick your flavor. Wedemayer's okay. The kid from Colorado. Is
McBride.
Yeah, McBride. Yeah, I mean, he's kind of got a story more because of his kind of his family situation than some of his tape. So I think there's a real mix of kind of athletes in there, but yeah, I don't think there's a standout day one kind of starter there.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're gonna have to get some guys that are a little bit more physical than Brevin Jordan for this team. I'm fine with Brevin Jordan being that primary. Hey, we can block with him, but we'd like to actually throw him the football. Whereas you have more of like, okay, here's a blocker only, and then maybe a receiver only. on this team, whereas Jordan's kind of that in-between guy. No more Jordan Akins, please. He's 70 years old in tight end years.
Would you take him back on like a 1 year, $2 million deal or something? No, not even.
No, Jordan Akins is the exact type of player that doesn't need to be on this roster anymore, because the likelihood that we have seen his best football is high. I would give his opportunity to a young guy that has not had any opportunity in the National Football League over putting him on the roster again.
Yeah, probably. I think you're probably right there. And then,
sorry, we were talking about the draft. I interrupted you with the
no worries. No, I think it's an interesting kind of dilemma. I think, because I just don't think there's necessarily going to be, because if you go, even we talked about the other week about. In Oakland, or at Oakland at the time when they wanted to get out, they took Colin Farrell at the time from Clemson, which was a bit of an overshot, but they couldn't get out of that spot. There was nobody there. That Rick Smith tried desperately to get out in 2014. Atlanta were very close to doing it, but he wanted the King's ransom for it. So I think if Caserio does get out of that, I think he's, like you're saying, checkered history with trade. He'll probably end up taking cents on the dollar on those on that move if he does. I don't think he'll get the full draft scale points, if you like, to do that. So because there's just that lack of top end talent. Now, the one guy who I said this last week, I think that if you watch Kyle Hamilton the Rose Bowl against Devontae Smith and Mac Jones and all that kind of cast of players, he looked the best player on the field, I think, at times. If you watch that game in AT&T Stadium, and I think there's so many instances of just elite traits. Now, I know his 40 time wasn't great yesterday, and there's slight questions on some of it. But for me, I just think Kyle Hamilton is the best player in this draft in terms of football IQ. They were talking about him; his grades were good enough to go to Ivy League. Just a lean 220 gazelle in the secondary, and I just think there's not many players like that. And if you're not sure about the premium quality of those edge rushers, and you can't get out of that pick, I think at this stage of this development curve, best player available has got to be. And I hope he's there at 3, and there's a decision to make. Could you trade back out and still get him 5 or 6 spots lower? Probably. But if you're stuck at that spot, for me, I think if, just say for example, the 2 edge rushers go and there's a shock, and it's not an alignment at 1, then perhaps there. But I find it difficult to not. I hope they can find a way to get back, maybe pick up another pick and get him rather than being stuck at 3. But I can't find an argument to see not taking him if he's there.
It would be incredible if one of these teams that is before the teens ends up with Deshaun Watson, and you end up with their pick. The Commanders, the Falcons, the Broncos, the Panthers. It would be incredible to leave the first round of the NFL draft with Kayvon Thibodeau and Kyle Hamilton, or Evan Neal and Kyle Hamilton, or Ike Ekwonu and Kyle Hamilton. It'd be incredible. That would just put an A next to the Texans draft at that point if you do that. That's why where Watson ends up, where that other pick comes from, is so incredible, because Detroit's not taking him at 2. Not after the Okuda thing from a couple years ago. The Jets aren't taking him at 4. They need a pass rusher and offensive lineman far more. I don't think that the Giants would take him with either of their selections. I feel like they need things that aren't him. Carolina's not taking him at 6. They need an offensive lineman or a quarterback or something else. They just spent a first-round pick on a DB last year. Now, I know that was a corner, so he's not going there. Now, then you just get it. Okay, Atlanta. They kind of need stuff on offense. Maybe they're going quarterback. Denver's not taking him. He starts to kind of fall. And then if you have that pick in the late 10s, the early, part of, 10, 11, 12, 13, that's where he's like, it's like, oh my God, like people think he's this best player in the draft, and he fell to us because we have that additional first round pick. Like, that is such a value building move for this organization. That would just be, I'd be over them at 3. I'd have very big questions about doing it at 3, but 6 on, sign me up for some Kyle Hamilton.
Yeah. And I think that there's an opportunity for the one of, if not 2 of those Philly picks. I mean, for me, I would probably spread the risk and push it back into next year if any picks you can get. And I include Tunsil in that. If you can't get a first this year, which I doubt you do, considering that terrible short, high value contract, which has been reworked, it's going to be really difficult to get appropriate value considering the initial outlay of 2 firsts and a second, albeit the second was for Stills, so it's still 2 firsts. But, let's not go down that path of one of the worst trades anybody could have ever done. But I'd probably push them back into next year just because I think there's a chance that you're going to get the two, CJ Stroud, Bryce Young are going to be there, and you probably want the capital to give you that flexibility if you want to pull the trigger. And like a year's a long time. Sam Howell looked like he was going to be something, lost all these weapons in the draft and last year, and it fell off dramatically. So a lot can change in a year, but those two guys seem like it. So for me, I would probably, again, I know it's kicking the can down the road. Last year was a waste of time. You're going to probably at some points feel like that this year, but maybe the eye's got to be on that a little bit more than it is right now.
I very much believe, because we didn't see it in college football this season, I very much believe we will have, yet again, what we saw happen a couple of different times. We will have a Kyler Murray, a Baker Mayfield, a Joe Burrow in next year's college football class. I very much believe it. It will not just be CJ Stroud and Bryce Young at the top. I do not know who that guy is, but the way college football works these days, I do believe we will have that guy that comes from basically back of your mind from a quarterback standpoint to front of your mind. I absolutely believe that, because I think that's going to happen basically every year in college football from now on. You've had it happen almost every season. Just so happens this year's the one year it doesn't happen. That's fine, because I do believe it'll happen next year. I don't know who the guy is. That's going to be sort of a research project this summer, but I do very much believe someone will come from the back of mind to front of mind and get in the conversation with Stroud and Bryce Young, because it happens every year. This is the anomaly. This is not the standard. This year is the anomaly where you don't have that guy.
It's a good free agency.